Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is episode 4. It's pretty exciting, as you can see. There's 3 of us this time. So this is This Week in Thought. I'm Chunky. In the middle, that's Cossack there. And over on the right, introducing Red Med, who is our friend, has been a friend of ours for a long time. And we were hoping that from the beginning of the podcast he could join us. Well, schedules have not been cooperating until today. So today's our first episode for the 3 of us. And so I'm very happy. I'm glad you're able to join us and talk about all kinds of stuff, hopefully.
Yeah, I am definitely. I've been rewatching some of the first couple episodes, and I've got a bunch of questions. Not really questions, just kind of clarifications I want. So
I'm down for it.
So I guess if you're ready, my first one is about sim theory. I guess, Cossack, if you want to kind of give me a little rundown of what it's supposed to be, we'll kind of rearrange my question, I guess.
Basically, that part of our existence is a construct, or all of it, depending on what theory you believe in. It's the idea that the nature of this world could be holographic, or run on a giant computer, or it's not as set in stone as we believe. So if we can manipulate our idea of the simulation, we can take control of it. You know, whether that's just our own mental construct that we're manipulating, or we're manipulating the outside as well. Who knows?
Okay, so if it's a construct created by us, or is it created by somebody else?
Oh, that's no one knows. That's
okay.
A lot of the world we live in is a construct made of our mind. Like, our brain fills in a lot of data too, and it actually there was a study a little bit ago saying that it prefers the made-up data to the actual input from outside.
Okay. So then, go ahead.
Oh, just that your mind brings in the input, uses it to create a mental world, and that's what you experience.
Okay, so then if that's part of if it's part of the theory that we are able to manipulate it, why can't we just manipulate it to, I don't know, run amok, do whatever we want, and then just go back and, I don't know, maybe end it for ourselves and then restart the whole thing over?
I don't know.
What I'm saying is, why can't I just become a serial killer and then have no regrets off of it, because I know I can just go jump off a bridge and it resets the whole construct of my life?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm thinking about it the same way you are, Cossack, but my take is that it's the reason, Red Med, that we can't do that is because it's not a simulation, and there are in fact actual consequences that can't be undone. However, it doesn't completely poke holes in, let's call it the solipsistic view, which is really any view where you say this is all an illusion. So whether it's we're living in a hologram, or we're living in the Matrix, or we're all living in a simulation created by my mind, like I'm dreaming up everything, including everyone, including you guys, or maybe you guys are the actual agent and I'm just the appearance in your mind. It could be that your mind is saying, well, there have to be limitations, there have to be rules to my game world, and one of those rules is consequences. Meaning that if you do something that appears to be fatal, like killing someone, being a serial killer, I have to create that mental consequence in the game world construct to keep it consistent for you, even if you're the only person that exists and it's all in your mind. I think. But I don't know. Does that mean it couldn't be violated? I don't know. Maybe it could be.
Yeah, it's until you do it,
Good.
Well, I think you have to believe something's possible to accomplish it. So, or even just the idea that it's possible, because otherwise your brain will filter out. Part of the simulation theory is that your mind acts as a filter. It brings in a whole bunch of data, it filters out a whole bunch, and you get a little part of it. So a lot of it's real, and a lot of it's made up, and sometimes you can't tell the difference. Like, there's a lot of studies about how memory is. a memory's not consistent, and you make it up.
Yeah, no, I haven't read them, but I do know that is very true. One of them was there was a study that said, this person came into a classroom, blah blah blah, and everybody gave a different description of that person, even though it only happened 5 minutes ago. And yeah, your brain takes in a bunch of information and filters out certain information, but it's not always true. Which kind of gives me the thought of, if 50 people in the same room try and describe the same person 5 minutes after they see them for 30 seconds, then why can't we just make in our own mind, say, hey, this simulation is screwed up. I'm going to change it with my mind and say, this is going to be a better ideal state for me, so I'm going to change it by jumping off a bridge and basically restarting.
If there are more people making the reality, it would almost become a consensus, the laws of physics. So I think that might keep things moving in a forward type direction. Well, and that's the whole, the bead theory of time, where you're moving from bead to bead to bead to bead. And it's good for conceptualization, but in reality there's just one bead that's moving, that's just changing states.
Okay. That's interesting.
Like, it may make waves that could go forward and backward and future, like what was it, Peter Carroll talking about shadow time. But I think that's just probabilities. That
was pretty much my thing on the sim theory is, why can't we just, if it's like Chunky said, if this is my sim theory, why can't I change the both of you? More like what I want.
There's something to be said, I think, and Cossack was alluding to this, but I don't know that it's just simulation theory. I mean, I think that this idea goes back quite a long ways. Do you guys remember there was a quote in the New Testament where Jesus is wandering around doing all these miracles. He gets to this town, and again, I don't remember the specifics of it, but he gets to a town, and the town is full of a bunch of skeptics. And they're like, well, do a miracle. And he's like, I can't do a miracle here. You people have no faith. The miracle happens because you manifest it through the power of your own faith. But all of you have faith in the opposite, which is that the miracle won't happen. So I'm powerless to make it happen here. I mean, that kind of is like the notion of there's this... it's a very occult notion, I will say, from what I've read. The notion that your belief is the catalyst. It's the strength of your belief. And if you've actually got stronger beliefs, like reservations that it can't happen, those are equally powerful, just because they might be subconscious. And, I mean, they could be even greater. They could be the thing preventing you from manifesting what you're talking about, RedMed. Maybe. If one were to believe that, I'm saying that's not a new idea. That the strength of belief impacts the effectiveness of, let's say, the ability to manifest those concepts, those metaphysical concepts in reality.
Okay. And there's also, it comes and goes in popularity, like The Secret, where if you put out happy vibrations into the universe, happy things will come back. And I think at the very least you can do things like that to change your filter. So, like, if you convince yourself and you have faith that you're going to have a good day, you're going to seek out the good parts and minimize the negative parts.
I believe that we can do.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the sim theory is what it really not bothered me, but it really bit into my mind and kind of chewed at it and said, basically, I don't know if I believe that, because if it was such a thing, then why can't we change it with our mind?
People throughout history have said you can, and here's how to do it. I mean, it's without actually doing it. It's kind of difficult to say whether it's possible or not. But I think it is possible. So I think experimentation would be necessary to push the boundaries.
I'm not encouraging or advocating that anybody do this, RedMed, but to your point, when you're saying, why can't we do it? How do we do it? There have actually been authors who've written manuals, believe it or not, how-to manuals on exactly the steps that one might take to manifest those kinds of things. I mean, they're considered occult. They're considered magic books of magic with a K, but there have been like descriptions of do these steps and it will yield these results, which are the kind of results I think you're talking about.
All right. Well, that kind of works for me. The other one out of episode 1 that I really enjoy exploring is the whole alien thing. Why aren't there aliens? We're in such an incredibly vast universe that we haven't even touched on that. Who's to say that they're not out there? And if they are, to go back to this sim theory, why wouldn't these aliens come in and be aggressive enough to take us over back in the Stone Age and then use us as an experiment? I mean, why do they have to be, just because they're flying around the universe, why do they have to be peaceful? Why couldn't they use us as experiments?
If you look at history, there are all kinds of tales of weird beings doing weird things. So I personally think that it's just a matter of believing that you can see them and that there can be the possibility that they're already here, and you'll start to see weird things.
That reminds me, Cossack, a little bit of the plot of the movie They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper and those glasses.
Oh, yeah.
That's one thing. But I guess I have more of a Star Trek explanation for why we're not seeing the aliens. I have this uncanny feeling that if you were to go to the edge of our solar system outside the Oort cloud, there's the equivalent of that yellow police tape around the whole thing saying like not crime scene, but like primitive culture, do not enter, where all the aliens that are part of the actual Federation are like, oh, the hairless monkeys on the third planet revolving around that star are dangerous. They're violent, and they're sort of, they're corrupt, and they treat each other like shit. They don't really work like a society, so stay away from them because they're likely to kill you if you go down and try to interact with them. I fear that might be what's actually going on.
Do y'all remember a couple years ago where there was one island, I don't remember what ocean it was in, and everybody was like, don't go there. There's this tribe, and no one interacts with them because they kill anybody who tries. And the missionary was like, okay, I think I'm going to try, and he got, bad things happened to him when he tried to go there. I think this is like that. This place is like that.
Yeah, that same tribe on the island saw like a little one-seater crop duster type plane, and when it returned back to the airport, it had like 50 arrows sticking out the bottom of it.
That's the welcoming committee.
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, if we're violent enough to prevent aliens, I could see that. If we're violent enough to prevent aliens to come in and see what we're like, I could. But then again, why wouldn't the violent aliens come in and try and secretly invade us and take us over and use us for experiments? I mean, it's been in our own history that our own race has come in, and it was forcefully, it wasn't secretly, but taken over groups of people and used them for experiments.
It's one of the things that gives me hope about that possible situation, because if there was either just hostile aliens, if there was nothing preventing them from coming in, they just come in and use some sort of horrible technology and get rid of us. So either there's a use for us, or there's something like a prime directive or something keeping others away, or like sort of non-interfering.
And there's also the possibility that that to become, let's say, a star traveling species, like to be able to bridge the interstellar gap, you have to get to a certain level of technology, and the only way to achieve that level of technology is to, let's say, advance socially your civilization to the point that you do away with scarcity, artificial scarcity, and poverty, and internal strife and competition. It's just so that you can build, let's say, the Stargate or whatever it is that you need to. So let's say there's a bunch of alien races out there that have that level of technology. I mean, the theory would be that they've all advanced to that level, and so then they created that prime directive as part of their federation that says, yeah, we're going to keep the little primitive cultures quarantined until they advance to our level, and then once they can build a Stargate, they can join us, because that'll mean that they've done away with war and poverty and all that crap. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, especially if, which my theory is that they don't come here physically. They train their minds and they use some sort of light vessel, to transport their consciousness. So, you may have to get your mentality to a certain level to be able to do that, which would filter out all the negative as well. But it seems like a lot of the encounters are positive and a few are negative. Like when you talk to the people who've been visited and all of that.
Right.
But I was visited once, I think. Way back when.
I think I've been visited 0 times. I'm not saying the others haven't, but I've had no such experience.
I'm pretty sure I have not seen or been visited.
What
was your experience?
Well, I'd been working nights and reading a whole bunch of weird things, so my mind was already open to the idea of visitations and all that other good stuff. Completely pitch black room, a little bit of sleep deprivation. There were three beings came into the room. Probably one, about like my height, other two, probably taller, I guess. Like, sort of darker than the pitch black room. But it sounds like it's not possible, but they were more like a vacuum. That part was odd. And I had been doing some experiments with astral travel, and I got to a certain point where I could move in a sleep paralysis state. And I was in the sleep paralysis state, but I'd never been visited by beings or anything like that. So one of them, sort of looks at me like, and then leans in real close like, just see if I was awake. And then, sort of. And it looked like a typical gray, but as it got close, it looked like it was a suit behind that. It looked like there was, something behind, like the eyes on the typical gray it was like a lens. But at any rate, like I blinked, a couple different times, because you don't want to scare the weird alien, And then, once they realized that I was awake and I could move a little bit, because I smiled at them, they sort of backed up and sort of did like a symbol and then disappeared. But I remember it like it was yesterday. It was 20 years ago or so.
Wow.
Very singular experience.
Interesting.
So
Yeah, and I mean, besides you, I don't think at least nobody that I know of has admitted to it. So I don't know of anybody that's experienced something.
I knew one person that said that he had an experience not exactly like that, but where, again, he wasn't sure whether it was a dream state, a lucid dream state, or meditative. I don't think he knew what it was, but he believed he had had an encounter with what I think he thought were aliens, and that they were attempting to communicate something to him, but he wasn't able to decipher what the message was. I think it might have been like a mathematical message, and he wasn't sure what that meant. Those are the only two of people I've known that have described those things to me.
And see, I've always been interested in it, so I've always sort of ran towards that stuff. But a lot of times I'll talk about the stuff, and then people will go, "Oh, I don't believe in any of that," and then tell their ghost story.
I don't believe in aliens, but there's this vector that hangs out in my bedroom.
Yep, that one time.
Right. Yeah, those people crack me up. One of the other things that goes along with this space thing that we've got going right now is you were talking about colonizing Mars and robotics and putting things together with computer programs and whatnot. Why would we go to Mars when we've got a giant rock between Earth and Mars that we haven't been back to in 50 years? Why haven't we gone back there?
I'm guessing you're directing that to me. I think I was the one talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, two things. First is, absolutely, we have to prove everything out on the moon first. And what I'm describing actually is the path that NASA's doing with the Artemis program. It's to basically perfect all of that colonization technology on the moon in the next few years, and then export that technology to Mars. But the reason that we should eventually get to Mars is that the moon is part of a system. It's like the the Seleno geosystem or something like that. It's like basically the moon and Earth are one celestial system, meaning that let's say there were a planet-destroying catastrophe that hit Earth. I'm talking about a comet that bust the Earth in half. That would like have a direct and probably catastrophic effect on the moon as well, because they're in like a binary rotation system. However, Mars is not. Mars, it's heliocentric, but it's on a completely different orbit, and so there may be an impact, like a gravitic impact, if the Earth and the Moon were gone to Mars's orbit, but it wouldn't necessarily destroy them. I don't think it would have to be like a stellar catastrophe, like the star would have to collapse or go supernova for it to take out Mars. So my theory is that if we just get to Mars and colonize that with, let's say, several million people where it's a self-sustaining colony, then even if something tragic happens to Earth and takes out the Earth-Moon system, Mars is still there and we don't lose our civilization. So that's why I'm like hyper-focused on Mars. And not that that's by any means the only place we should colonize. Like what Kosik was saying last time about colonizing Venus, there's a lot of like really attractive reasons why Venus is the better one to colonize. It's just that it requires a lot more advanced geoengineering than we have right now. Mars, we wouldn't even try to terraform it. We would just build habitats, and we could like build a habitat megastructure in theory on Mars, and then export enough civilization to make us multi-planetary in the short term. In theory, I think.
Have they done any studies to see if we could actually physically sustain our bodies to sustain the different gravity that Mars has versus what we have here on Earth?
Yeah, that's a problem. I was wrong in that last episode, and I did the research. I think it's like 37 or 38% of Earth's gravity is all Mars has. So it's more than the moon, but it is a microgravity environment, meaning that if you're walking around there and you're not doing massive exercise to keep your muscle and bone structure at the level that it is, in theory it would atrophy. But I would ask this question. I don't know the answer of it. Do we really need to maintain an Earth level of structure in our bodies? If, in fact, we export humans there and they're going to live their whole lives on Mars, why do we need to condition their bodies to exist in Earth conditions? They really just need to exist in Mars conditions, meaning more slender, weaker bone structure, much smaller muscle mass and density, because there's not a lot of gravity that they're resisting when they walk. I guess I don't know. I don't know if we need to worry about that. Maybe we do. I don't know.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just wondering, what if a global catastrophe happens on Earth and we've still got the colony on Mars? Well, now we have to do the colonization of another planet to back ourselves up to Mars. And then we go to Mars or go to whatever other planet, and now all of a sudden the gravity is more on that planet. So we've got to evolve back to the body structure that we had.
I see what you're saying. I don't think the process has an end. I think getting to Mars is the next step. Well, getting to the moon to prove out the concept, then colonizing Mars, but then it'll be the job of the Earthlings and the Martians to work on colonizing the next thing, and then the next thing. I think it has to keep going, because what you said is true. We need these colonies all over the place if we're going to hope to survive, like, let's say, stellar catastrophes. We got to get outside the solar system. Mars isn't far enough. If something happens to the sun, which, by the way, it will in a few billion years, it'll go supernova or burn out or white dwarf or something, meaning that this won't be a habitable solar system at that point. So Mars is just the next step. It's not the last step, I don't think.
No, definitely not. It can't be, because otherwise we're in trouble. Yeah, I think that was it for that one.
Well, I think the solar system, there are so many resources in the solar system we can exploit. We could be here for a long time before even thinking about leaving the solar system. There's so many minerals and ways to get energy out of the system of the solar system. You could get all the solar energy on Mercury, build a laser transmitter, and use it to propel ships out of the solar system.
The one thing that I worry about is the one thing that we need the most is oxygen. How much oxygen does Mars have? How much oxygen can we produce by bringing in, I don't know, vegetables for hydroponics, but it also produces us a little bit of oxygen since Mars doesn't have good soil to grow the food that we need. I mean, we can't ship ourselves oxygen tanks from Earth, can we?
We can, but it would be extremely expensive from like an energy standpoint. It'd be difficult to move that much, I think. So what you're talking about there, you mentioned one which is, export plants, and then plants do the work of creating oxygen. We can create like an ecosystem where we're breathing the carbon dioxide and they're exhaling the oxygen and we're exchanging it. And so we get kind of on Mars what's going on here on Earth, which is really to say we're terraforming, but on a small scale, like inside, let's say, a facility. But I don't know that would be enough, certainly not in the short term. However, I believe there's a process called hydrolysis, where if you find, let's say, water, even if it's like frozen water, subterranean water on Mars, you can apply electricity to it, I believe, and convert it back into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen can be captured for fuel, and then the oxygen can be breathed, encapsulated into like tanks, and then used to provide oxygen for the facility, for the living facility. I think that's the plan in the short term, although I'm not sure.
That's something new to me. I didn't know that they were working on that.
Or
have it already.
I think they had to develop it when they started to do submarines. They needed to find a way to take salt water, desalinate it, and then generate oxygen underneath in the sub. And so that was when they invented hydrolysis, or they applied hydrolysis. I don't know when it was invented.
Yeah, I never would have thought of that. I mean, they are down there for 6 months or 6 weeks at a time.
That's conventional subs. Nuclear subs can be down for like months at a time. So they don't have enough plants to generate the oxygen. I think they got to make their own.
That's somewhere where we could do some exploring as humanity goes on the ocean floor.
You mentioned that last time. What were you talking about specifically when you said that? What did you want to, or what could we explore?
No, I mean just habitats. Practice for when we do go to Mars and into the solar system, but practice here, where it's a little bit more forgiving. But you can dial it up pretty well by just going deeper. If you can build a habitat down, 3,000 meters or so.
Yeah, I will say it's a little bit different because underwater, you're talking about extreme pressure on the outside that has to be resisted. Whereas if you talk about, like, let's say the moon or Mars, and you've got no atmosphere, you've got extreme pressure from the inside pushing out that you have to resist from exploding. So I guess it's the resistance to pressure, just which direction.
Right. But I was thinking more of, building habitats and keeping seals together and resisting stress. Even archaeology under the ocean. Because there are whole continents that were above water 10,000 years ago that are below water now. Example being like Sundaland, where like right around Malaysia, that whole area was above ground. And then, once the glaciers melted, it filled in. But who knows what's under there, I believe there were at least societies, they at least had stone carving, a simple astrology, 12,000 years ago, so they had to have some sort of civilization.
So you're saying like there was a culture on that area that is now subterranean 12,000 years ago?
I think that it's some form of culture, I don't know.
Oh, they found artifacts down there to indicate that?
No, because it's underwater.
Oh, you're saying just civilization in general 12,000 years ago had that stuff. Got it.
Right. I think Turkey is where the one Golby Tepe, I can't. But anyway, it was buried. But I think they say it's 12,000 years old, the older ones.
Wow.
Rock carvings.
Yeah, actually, that's a great lead into my next one, was the collectivism that you guys were talking about towards the end of the first episode, I think it was. I've told many of people this. Collectivism sounds like communism, not as we know it, but on paper. That is a fantastic form of government, or form of civilization, not necessarily government, but of civilization, where I farm carrots, you farm beets, and you raise cows, and we just switch for whatever we need. Or not even switch, we just all throw it in a pile, and I need this, this, and this for my stew tonight, so I'll take it home. But what do you do about that one asshole that you kick out, so that way you no longer have 140 or 50, you've got 149. Now you start the interview process to get that 150th person in. That asshole is going to start a collective of his own of 149 other assholes that are going to come after you because you kicked them out. So then you start the whole process of segregation of communities and warring tribes. And then my collective is going to have to join with this collective to prevent asshole collective from coming to get the both of us. So I don't think that would work. I mean, even though it might work in, like you said, in states around here or countries or whatever where they have them and they live off the land and they pay taxes to the state that they live in. They, create products to sell so they can pay the taxes. But I think those are rarities. I don't know. What do you guys think? I saw you smiling, so Chunky, I think you're kind of on the same lines.
I think that my solution is going to be very different than Cossack, but I think he's already thought about this for how it works in the small, so I'd like to hear his response.
Kind of the story of humanity. I mean, we always have to... It's everything would be better if we could get that 5% and just make them, go off on their own little area and leave us the heck alone, Stop making the wars, share everything. Because I think 95% of the people, they're cool with that. But that 5% just does an amazing job of spreading their nastiness. So if we could figure out a way to segregate them from society, then I think we have a chance.
But then, like I said, those 5% are all going to gather, and that 5% is going to be stronger than the 95% because they've got the evil thoughts in their mind of how to screw with the rest of us and take us out or make us slaves.
I think solving that has been, probably a 6,000 to 8,000 year old problem. I think we do it through the culture, the stories we tell. And part of it is we have to stop glorifying displays of wealth. If they're wearing a $5,000 bag, if you have 10 million people going, that's disgusting. You could have fed 1,000, 5,000 people. What's wrong with you? Then you'll see people changing. I mean, it's almost like the culture has to lead first. And I think that having more good examples of communes is important too. Where if you go look at the camera, we're all here having fun, living in our commune, everybody's healthy, not cultish. If you provide a viable alternative, you'll get more people to move over to it.
Okay.
Yeah, there was this quote, and man, I can't remember if it was Plato or Aristotle or someone newer, but it was something to the effect of, if you, again, I'm going to butcher the quote, but the idea was, if you teach the children correctly, it won't be necessary to punish the men, something like that. And so for me, this is all, the silver bullet, if there is such a thing, is education. It has nothing to do with the Hatfield and McCoy, 149 of us aren't good with you, and so you're going to go off and find all the other assholes, and now you form the other group, and now it's the constant feud. Now I don't think that's the right solution. It's more important in my estimation to focus on what humans have in common than what they don't have in common. Focus on our similarities, not our differences. And if we were to change the way we train young people, that is to say, compel them to see every person as being, let's say, of equal value to them, and that became part of their mental habit, by the time they become adults, they're not going to demonize other people. They're not going to behave in the asshole-ish way that would compel the other 149 to eject them from the commune, for example. To me, what you're pointing at speaks to the bigger problem, which is, why do we have any assholes at all? If we're a supposedly evolved civilization, what the presence of all these people where a majority of them are looking at going, hey man, you're behaving like an asshole. That, to me, that if that person's behaving like an asshole, that's more of a condemnation of civilization than of that person. That person's just acting according to their programming, their upbringing, their genetics, their life experiences, all the education they were given. If you get an adult asshole and everybody agrees that their behavior is bad, that everybody should blame themselves collectively as a society for not raising that person better so that they aren't behaving in such asshole-ish ways, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It is it's not only a society thing, it's a parent thing. Because if parent's an asshole, the kid's going to be an asshole, because that's the only thing the kid sees. Not the only thing, but that's the majority of of what the kid sees. Now they're going to go to school or whatever they're going to go to and transfer that behavior to school. But because of our wonderful society nowadays and how you can't offend anybody and you can't discipline anybody, there's no public discipline. They're going to remain assholes and breed them even more. So that's where the community comes in. It starts with family, and I think ultimately it starts with the family. The community is the middle and the biggest part, and then ends with the family, because the community needs to go to the family and say, look, this needs to change. Then the family comes back down to that child and says, look, we've been wrong. This is not how you act. This is the way that needs to be done.
And in a commune, would there be a set of directives or, rules? Or would more rules be better? Or, how would... Because I think it's going to be a transition process while the education process happens to get to the utopia society. All of those wrinkles need to be ironed out culturally.
I'll tell you, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I would just change one word there. I don't think that the subculture or the macroculture or whatever, whoever's making the rules, should be making rules that tell you what you can't do. In other words, rules to limit behavior or rules to describe what's considered illegal. Instead, they should be setting definitions for good behavior. What's positive? In other words, what are the responsibilities? What are your duties as a citizen? I mean, if you look at the way, like in Western civilization, our legal systems are structured, they're primarily punitive. They mostly say, well, here's a series of things you can't do, and not only that, but once you break those rules, because we know you're going to break them now that we've told you it's a rule, and all people are anti-authoritarian by default, once you break them, here's how we're going to punish you. Well, I mean, that's articulating operating instructions that way sets the system up for conflict and failure. If as an alternative, the instructions were all articulated in terms of responsibilities. Like for example, you have a responsibility to vote. You have a responsibility to hold elected office and make decisions. You have a responsibility maybe to be a judge, or you have a responsibility to advocate on behalf of those that are on trial for something. Or you have a responsibility to behave a certain way when you interact with your neighbors, your coworkers, your fellow citizens. I mean, if all of our regulations were shifted away from what you can't do to what you should do, I wonder if that wouldn't start by setting the good example at the legal level for good behavior instead of bad behavior. I mean, there's not a whole lot of laws, if you think about it, that tell you what you ought to do or what you have a responsibility to do. There's the law that says, when you're driving, it says who should yield the right of way, but there's no one that says the counter side, which is like who has the right of way. So it's all responsibility, not privilege. And then for like young men, when they turn 18, they have the responsibility to register for selective service. So it's there's a penalty that you get for not fulfilling your duty, not a penalty for someone impinging on your rights. In other words, selective service isn't about rights, it's about responsibilities. And I'm saying that those are the two examples that come to mind. But aside from that, most of the other regulations I've seen tell you what you can't do, not what you should do. And so I'd like to see more of that. I don't know if you guys think that's the right approach or not.
Yeah. There should be more emphasis on what you should do. But for the beginning, you still need the emphasis on what you can't, or not so much the emphasis on what you can't do, but here's what we really suggest you not do, and if you do, here's what we're going to give you as a punishment. But in order to prevent that, we're going to write this book of suggestions, and the first 100 pages is what you should do as a society, what you should do as a family. And then we'll just skip 100 pages, just leave those blank. And the last 3 pages are going to be, hey, you messed up, this is what we're going to do to you.
Yeah, I think emphasis on responsibilities. I think the emphasis should be on responsibilities. I think there should be minimum standards as well, just for the health and safety of the community. Like, you can't have a house full of rats, and that's just to prevent disease. But I think there should be minimum standards, but I think the emphasis should be on what everybody should be doing.
I'd like to see even the minimum standards presented in positive language versus negative language. So in other words, you said a standard that says you can't have a house full of rats. To me, that's a negative statement that limits your actions. What if instead you say you should maintain a clean household that contains no pests?
I don't want to do that. And I'm saying in the in-between stage, there's going to be people who just don't.
Absolutely, there's going to be an in-between stage, but because there's going to be a difficult in-between stage where you've got holdovers of the old thinking, if we use that as a barrier to never changing our behaviors, we're never going to make progress. We're never going to start the effort.
Sure.
If we set the end goal in mind and say, hey, in the end goal, we're all behaving responsibly and so we don't need rules, yeah, there's going to be some old, rule-abiding, basically privilege hounds, privilege mongers, which is really, I think, what people that are all defensive and high and mighty going, well, you're not going to tell me X, Y, Z, and I'll have as many rats as I want in my house. Well, okay, fine. And there's a difficult period where you got to go through that. But the end result is after a generation or so, they all die. And now the people that are left to go, oh, hey, we just, maintain clean households and we don't have that rat problem anymore. And then they go, look what happened to the guy with all the rats. Yeah, he's dead. Guess the rats ate him alive. Covered in rat shit, his mostly bones left of his corpse were.
Sure, but if the rats spread plague and wipe out the community, there's no community to get to the utopic stage. So, I think the end state is great. I think you can have both, and I think at a certain stage you should have both, and then eventually transition over.
I think the transition period will be like you said, a generation or two.
Yeah.
In that generation or two, you take the laws that are punitive and negative, and like Chunky said, turn them to a positive note.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of you will not steal, it should be why don't you just
you should share.
Why don't you just share some of the stuff?
That's the rule. You should share.
Right. If I need a pencil, I'm not going to steal the pencil. I'm going to say, "Hey, bud, can I get a pencil from you?" So those should be turned more positive and become less. So I shouldn't have the punitive ones. I should not have to. There shouldn't be more than the positive ones. There should be less and less and less until there's none.
Yeah, I would love to see that. In fact, I'll tell you, this is interesting. This conversation kind of took like a decidedly right-hand turn into ethics, which is great. I love that. We could talk about it a little bit. We're kind of running up against our time here, but just trying to codify what those ethics ought to be. Like, it's easy to say, well, we should have only rules that speak in terms of ought and not in terms of thou shalt not. And that's when you paint with a broad brush. That's great, but the devil's in the details. Like, what specifically should those? Again, they're not regulations. They're more like recommendations, guidelines, virtues. Yeah. What are those? Like, can we even agree, like the three of us, on what those virtues are that we should be advocating? Because if like the three of us can agree, then maybe that's the foundation of something we could convince a larger group to adhere to. I don't know that there's any shared values, is what I'm getting at. I'd like to find out what they are. Anyway.
There's the prime value that virtues are better than vices. So if you go from there, you just pick whatever virtue you want. Just do virtuous things.
What if every two people always picked different and conflicting virtues of things that they label as virtues?
I think it would work itself out. I think everybody would have different virtues, but as long as they're on the virtue side of the divide.
What if a sadist says, well, I consider it virtuous to beat the shit out of someone, and another person says, no, that's insane and should never get pleasure out of harming another person? They both think that they're behaving virtuously. How do you reconcile the fact that the behaviors are directly in conflict?
As silly as it sounds, I think there should be a list of, it sounds silly, but a list of virtues here's the 100 virtues that we have. See which ones fit you the most and try and live by them.
I agree. Can you give me like one virtue? Can you name one thing that should be on that list in your mind?
Kindness. I mean, that's probably the most simple one.
And again, not to push the issue, but that's kind of a nebulous term. When you say kindness, what do you mean?
Striving to do good for others, not just yourself.
I appreciate your effort, but the word good, I think, is equally nebulous. What's good to one is evil to another, and vice versa. Let me offer this. Do you think that pleasure comes into the equation at all when you're talking about values? Or virtues, as Kasich said?
Sure. It feels good and validating to do good. Because I think...
Yeah, pleasure, but like you were saying earlier, my pleasure could be different than your pleasure.
But let me ask this. If we base it on pleasure, if we say values should be based on pleasure, or virtues should be based on pleasure, can we make it a normative decision as to what constitutes good pleasure or bad pleasure? Meaning, if 99% of us say that sadistic activities, which is to say the inflicting of pain on someone else, is bad, and only 1% says, yeah, that's good, can we normatively say, well, the bell curve agrees with us, and categorically, sadism is not virtuous?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
that's the easy case, guys. That's the easy case, the 99% to 1%. What about the 51% to 49%? When 51% say sadism is bad, and the other 49% go, come a little closer and say that. Because I think most of the issues are we've got a 51 to 49, and it's a tyranny of the majority, but it's barely there. And so until we resolve it and find out what the root foundational values that we all agree on are, we're going to have this conflict. We're going to be skating the tightrope, or we're walking the tightrope of conflict, I think.
Yeah. There was one more thing I wanted to touch on. The last thing I wanted to touch on, which is a very touchy subject for a lot of people, but it's not really for any of us because I've known you quite a long time, is divinity. When I think of divinity, I think of religious, not just Catholicism or Lutheran or Muslim, but there are a lot of types of religions out there that don't believe that, Jesus is the Savior. Judaism really really isn't a religion. Hindus, they're just made up. I don't think, I think if you're one of them or someone who believes in a religion, fabulous. Believe in it. Is there some sort of divinity as far as a God? I have no idea. Is there a presence that controls, not really controls, but it is part of everything? I think of the Jedi, as stupid as that is. Everything has a life force. And when I say that, I don't mean like this computer has a life force. I mean the trees, the grass, the humans. We all have a life force, and I have seen it. I have actually watched life force drain from somebody. So I honestly, truly believe that there is, I don't even know if you would call that divinity, but there is something that controls life in this world. So I don't know if I'm using divinity right or correct there.
Like an animating force.
Yeah.
Kasich has used that term before, and he probably has a specific definition that he thinks of when he says it. As an atheist, I don't think there is divinity. So if we're going to have the conversation, I got to go on one of your definitions, because I don't think there is such a thing.
The spirit.
Yeah, what does that mean? Because
animating force.
Animating force. What is it made out of? Is it energy?
Awareness.
Is
God, awareness.
Okay, again, God. What's God made out of? Is it energy? Is it matter? Is it
probably energy pattern awareness?
Okay, so like an energy pattern that it is omnipresent. It's everywhere in the universe.
Yeah,
I would call that.
It's the structure of it too. It's everything.
I'd call that the quantum field. And
sure.
I guess my thing is I don't attribute a notion of a consciousness or an awareness or a perspective, even if it's a universal perspective, or intention on its part, other than to proceed according to the laws of physics, which is to say, follow the arrow of time, increasing entropy toward the omega point. I don't see anything. There's no personality to it in my mind. I don't I don't think of like a personal creator deity or even an impersonal, deity who has a perspective or a consciousness. I see no evidence of that whatsoever. I would say there's a quantum field. Yeah, there's movement in that. There appears to be energy in that, and it appears to be following the arrow of time. That's about it. I don't know if that's enough, or if you guys think that there's a different ingredient in the secret sauce of what you call divinity.
I guess when I think of divinity, I think of the religious divine relationship of a god to the human race. That I don't know if it actually exists. What I believe, though, is that there is an energy or a life force that comes in to everyone. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't know if it's the quantum, what you were talking about, whereas it's just a physical energy moving from field to field or whatever I don't remember how you said it, but there's something that creates life in humans and, like I said, trees, plants, pigs, birds, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think it's the religious divinity of a god, because none of the religions believe in the same god.
It's possible, Redmed, that what you're talking about, and again, Cossack had suggested this in the discussion many years ago. I think he's on the right path, because what you're describing sounds like metabolism. That sounds to be like that's the behavioral feature, let's say the activity feature that's common to those things you mentioned, plants, animals, and it's something that, let's say, rocks don't have. They don't appear to undergo metabolic change. Would you say, is that fair? Is that for you the earmark of life? Or not life, what was the term you used? Yeah, you said life force. Is it metabolism? The presence of metabolism tells you that it has life force?
Yeah, I could see that, because in order to sustain life, you need to metabolize energy from whatever source you're getting it from, the sun, the food, the whatever. So you have to, in order to maintain your life force, you have to metabolize energy.
Like
So
fire.
yeah, I can see it as that.
Fire is usually what that symbolism is there, the spark of your life.
And as a symbol, but you're not talking about literal fire, because even though that consumes wood and converts it into heat and ash, it's not metabolic, right? Because after its process is done, it's dead. Whereas the process that Redmed's describing, the organism continues to live as a result of the metabolic process.
Well, sure, and it'd be fire is a metabolic process.
Oh, right. Not the entity. Got it. It's the process. So,
and where, it's a fire where you can feed it sticks, or you could feed it, bonds or whatnot,
And so, Redmed, is there anything that you think has a life force that doesn't also exhibit metabolism?
I don't think so. Like you said, rocks, they just sit there. The only thing that changes rocks is the environment, water or wind, or friction from other rocks. But you go into something like mulch. Mulch is decomposing and making food for insects. So, I don't know, is that metabolism for that tree to become rot, become food for something else? And if so, then, it might be very little, but sure, there would be a life force there. There's definitely a life force in that centipede that eats the rotted material, or does whatever it does with it.
Let me ask you, do you think that, how do I say this? Do you think that the presence of metabolism in an organism makes that organism valuable? Or the life force, as you call it, is the thing that makes an organism valuable?
Sure. That life force creates the value for that centipede to get eaten by a larger animal that eats that type of food. And then that larger animal feeds another larger animal. So that whole thing, it's the circle of life, but whatever, it's still metabolism. That each object is metabolizing the thing for it. So even if it's down to the rotting tree, sure, it's valuable because it has that metabolism factor to it.
if something has value because it has metabolism like an organism, be it a plant or an animal, is it disrespectful of its value? Is it not virtuous if we, let's say, consume it, use it as fuel for the metabolism of ourselves as just a different organism? In other words, is there some sort of evil act? And I know that's a loaded word. Is there some non-virtuous act involved in consuming a thing that undergoes metabolism as part of its own existence, plant or animal?
There's been ideas of that throughout history where you should pay something back. You consume, and you give some help to the animal somehow. And in the end of whenever this body's time to expire, it'll be consumed by the biosphere. Which it sounds kind of like the biosphere functions as an organism as well, with its own breaking everything down and building everything back up. So yeah, it'd be kind of silly to destroy it, considering we're part of the organism.
Yeah, I don't think it's, let's say, disrespectful to the animal or the plant that we eat. Because inherently, I think way back in the back of their brain or whatever controls their thought processes, their
instincts,
yes, thank you. Whatever controls their instincts, way back in the back of that, they know one of two things is going to happen. They're going to get eaten, or they're going to die naturally. They're going to get killed to be eaten, or they're going to die naturally. So, and it's the same with us, except we're pretty much not going to get eaten unless we're poking the nose of a lion. So way back in the back of our heads, we're going to die. So we need to, and then it starts over. We're going to die, become worm food, and then that worm gets eaten by a bird. That bird gets eaten by us. So it's not disrespectful to do something to the lesser life form when it's creating more for us to metabolize and create that circle.
I was right there with you until you used the word lesser. You describe non-human animals and plants as a lesser life form, I think. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing. I just want to know why, in your mind, do you make that value judgment where you say they're lesser than, let's say, human life? What makes them lesser? What are they missing that the humans have?
I didn't mean lesser life form as in they're below us. I meant a lesser life form as they might be smaller than us. Or
is it a complexity thing, like they're less complex?
I wouldn't even say that. I think lesser was the wrong choice of word for me. I wish I could go back and into that train of thought and change the word, because I just lost it. But they're not a lesser life form. They're not something that I am above. They're something that I coexist with, but use them as fuel for my metabolism to give back to the planet eventually.
I guess there's kind of a very specific line of questioning that I'm driving after, and I'm not being very direct. Let me be more direct with it. I'm a carnivore. Actually, I'm an omnivore because I eat plants and animals. I've had lots of discussions over the years with vegetarians who, by the way, think that I am the devil, I think, because I do things like eat cow flesh because I like the flavor of it. That's the reason. I could eat pellets, probably protein pellets if I wanted to, that could be synthesized in lab. That would be probably even more healthy for me. They'd certainly keep me alive. They'd keep my metabolism running well, and no cows would have to be harmed in that process. And it's not that I'm a sadist. It's not that I want to hurt cows. It's that I value the pleasure I get from eating a hamburger over the emphasis I place on the suffering, the supposed suffering that the cow has to undergo in its meager existence of being fattened up and slaughtered. Now, how would you evaluate me? Am I virtuous? Is that a vice? Or is there no aesthetic value at all to be assigned to the fact that I'm a carnivore when I could be a herbivore and live just as healthy a lifestyle to fulfill my metabolic needs as you were describing earlier?
To be honest, I think it's normal. I think the people who are vegetarians are missing out. Yes, they can get protein from other forms of vegetables, but cavemen were not vegetarians. They were omnivores. They got their food and sustenance from anything they could find. So, I'm sorry, vegetarians are, I don't know, whatever. But as far as the rest of the world goes, I think people who eat meat, you're right, do it for the flavor. In this day and age, we don't need to do it to continue to use as our life force. We do it because we enjoy it. What was the rest of the question? I'm sorry.
Man, I think you answered it. I would love to hear what Cossack's thoughts are on it, but I actually agree with you. Anyway.
I think it's something to work towards, personally, with me. When you're talking about the complexity, I definitely try to eat my idea of the less complex food. So like cows and pigs, they're a little bit too smart for me to really feel fully comfortable eating. I still do a little bit, but like chicken and fish, I feel better about eating because I think that they suffer less. But I'd much, as soon as they get the cricket flour going, I'm fine with that. Because I think the insects don't have as much consciousness as the other things. So I'd rather eat the least conscious.
Wow, I gotta say,
I assume as plants, but
yeah,
there might be plants that are as smart as some animals. So you kind of you have to kill to survive. But I think it's a matter of lessening it is kind of where I stand. Lessen the suffering involved in my continued existence.
We've spawned so many new topics, by the way, because how do you quantify suffering? Forget quantification. How do you even detect suffering in something other than the self?
Here's a curveball for you. Change your mind. Then the cows don't have suffering. If we're only in a simulation theory, that pig doesn't have suffering because I don't believe that pig suffered when I chopped its head off.
Yeah, but I think that the horrific sounds of it dying would probably make you think that it would test your faith.
I think that you've taken the first step on a slippery slope to Robespierre, and I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some heads rolling at the guillotine at the Bastille at the end of this one.
Yeah, it's radicalism kind of does that though. That
control. If we're in a simulation partially controlled, we don't hear the pig squealing when we chop its head off. I mean, isn't that part of the weakening?
Or to use the magic paradigm that Cossack was describing, maybe we only hear it squealing because we have a belief that it should squeal when it does what we think is suffering as a result of having its head in the process of being decapitated. So maybe we're creating the squealing and we're creating the sense of suffering by all of us collectively having a web of belief around that. According to that theory, which I'm not saying I agree with at all.
What if that pig isn't squealing? What if it's rejoicing and saying, now I get to come back as a cow?
Yeah, I don't know. If the animal walks up to you and says it's time for me to die, you want to eat me, I'm cool with that.
I love this, by the way. We've pissed off religions. We've pissed off PETA. We've pissed off so many groups in this episode. What a great episode. It's like Blockbuster. But that's ethics.
Yeah. So there's one I didn't get to touch on, but yeah, like I said, there was one spot I didn't touch on, but you might have touched on it in episode 2 and 3, and I'll look at it again and have a better, not argument, but more ideas for it.
Well,
yeah,
cool.
It's always nice to get more input.
Absolutely.
Into the conversation.
This feedback I really appreciate. I won't speak for Cossack, but it's nice to hear when somebody else has heard the conversation we've had, and to kind of be a sounding board, or just just something we can measure it against to see from another perspective whether you get down deep in a philosophical rabbit hole, and sometimes you don't realize whether you've taken like a left turn into absurdity, or whether people are kind of like going, yeah, I can see that, I can follow that reasoning. So I really appreciate having another voice, another mind thinking about it.
Yeah, no problem. I liked it. I like you guys' conversation. I wish I could get in on it more.
Cool, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. This is awesome. This is a good one.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I know we got a couple here, I think, before the end of the month, where hopefully you can join us again. Get a few more episodes in before the craziness starts.
One next week, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Today's what, the 19th? And we got another one coming up maybe on the 24th.
Yep. And then 24th of next month, I think, is what we decided on.
Well, tell you what, since Red Med is going to be able to join us on the 24th, if you guys are cool with it, he said he had one more topic he wanted to talk about from an earlier one. I mean, maybe we could start with that. Cool deal. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. It's been great. And this is episode 4, so we'll catch you again. Hopefully episode 5 we're going to do here coming up on Tuesday the 24th. Hope everyone has a good weekend, good week coming up.
Have a great week, everybody.
Yep.
All right. See you next time.
Thanks. See ya. The opinions expressed in the preceding podcast are not necessarily those of the individuals who expressed those opinions. The creators and participants of this podcast hereby absolve themselves of any and all liability for damages that might arise as a result of the viewing, hearing, or acting upon the ideas expressed in this podcast. By watching or listening to this podcast, you hereby agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the creators and participants of this podcast from any and all claims, demands, damages, or liabilities resulting from the experiencing of the contents of this podcast.